Confirmation bias, also called reinforcement bias, is the tendency to analyze information in such a way that it confirms your prior beliefs while ignoring information that conflicts with it. It is particularly strong when the belief is important to you. Imagine you just read an article about a famous individual you dislike. After reading this article, you felt even more justified in disliking this person. However, your friend, who was a fan of the famous individual, actually thought the article presented the famous individual in a positive light. How did you and your friend read the same article but come out with different results? Confirmation bias influences how people seek out information. They will seek out sources that confirm their beliefs and ignore sources that challenge their opinions. This can cause them to miss important information or gloss over information that does not support their perspective. Confirmation bias leads people to weigh information that confirms with their belief more heavily than contradictory information. For example, many people read or watch news from only one outlet. This explains how people will persist in their belief based on a single source, even in the face of multiple sources that document the opposing side. Confirmation bias also causes people to interpret information in a way that confirms their beliefs. So, when faced with a neutral source that can be viewed multiple ways, they describe it in a way that confirms their beliefs. Confirmation bias also leads to biased recall of information. It will cause people to remember the information that supports their beliefs and forget contradictory information. For example, in one major study of confirmation bias conducted at Stanford University in 1979, researchers gave students two fictitious research studies that supported opposing views on capital punishment. They were designed so that the statistics presented in each study were equally compelling. What they found was that even after being confronted with evidence from both sides, no students changed their opinion, and in fact, they felt even more strongly about their views on capital punishment than before. Why might confirmation bias exist? It is essentially a shortcut to conserve mental energy. Our ancestors didn't have the luxury of taking the time to consider all the options. When faced with a large shape coming at them in the dark, they had to act instead of wondering whether it was dangerous. Not all our decisions today are life and death, but the brain still has the shortcut that prioritizes choosing quickly based on what you already know, instead of comparing and contrasting the opinions. The confirmation bias also serves the purpose of helping people avoid cognitive dissonance, which is the stress caused by holding two incompatible beliefs. People feel more comfortable once they have formed an opinion, and they then seek to avoid further psychological stress by solidifying that opinion. How does cognitive bias impact us socially? In societies, confirmation bias has worrisome implications. It can impede socio-political cooperation, which requires us to consider other points of view. If people on opposing sides fall prey to confirmation bias and simply can't listen to each other, little progress can be made. There is a group version of confirmation bias called confirmatory thought, identified in 2002 by Harriet Lerner and Philip Tedlock. When an individual interacts with people whose views on a controversial topic are known, they tend to adopt that view themselves in an effort to fit into the group. Confirmatory thought can lead to groupthink, where individuals simply accept the group's decisions, failing to follow a process of rational decision-making. This can lead the group to narrow their ways of looking at problems, which can have business or social consequences depending on the nature of the group. For example, the company Kodak is one example of how groupthink can be detrimental. Executives were so afraid to disagree with the group that the company failed to adapt to changing consumer needs, insisting that digital technology wouldn't replace film. Confirmation bias is very pervasive, but you can reduce its effects on your individual or group decision-making process. You can make sure to explore a situation without forming an early opinion or hypothesis. By delaying picking a side, you will remain more open to the evidence from opposing sides and can be more rational in your decision-making. Once you form an opinion, you can actively look for reasons why that idea might be wrong, or why an alternative idea might be better. You can also minimize the effects of confirmation bias by asking open-ended questions, seeking more information instead of asking leading questions that point to a certain type of response. Confirmation bias doesn't just impact decision-making. In data-driven technologies, confirmation bias can cause people to collect evidence or analyze evidence in such a way to support their hypothesis. They might throw out outliers because they contradict their hypothesis, or they might interpret ambiguous information as supporting their argument. This is very important to consider when it comes to data collection and interpreting data. For example, a data scientist may demonstrate confirmation bias when they actively seek out and assign more weight to evidence that confirms their hypothesis, and ignore or underweight evidence that could disconfirm their hypothesis. Confirmation bias can also lead to the filter bubble effect, a term coined by Elie Pariser in 2011, which is when technology can actually intensify our confirmation bias. We see this especially in media algorithms, designed to use what you have read in the past to predict what you might want to read now. They end up narrowing the information that is put on your feed. Over time, you are less likely to be exposed to new or opposing ideas. In order to minimize confirmation bias effects on data-driven technology, we should create checks and balances that enforce the process of seeking out both confirmatory and contradictory evidence and weighing the evidence fairly. As individuals, we can avoid the filter bubble effect by consciously seeking out information from a wide variety of sources. That would expand the data the algorithm has accessible and allow it to amplify our attempts to seek out balanced information.